Hey friends, software is everywhere, putting us devs on the front lines of innovation, improving people's lives, shipping new and better features, all while moving faster than ever before, which is where our friends at Raygun can help. Their powerful error and performance monitoring tools make it easy to get all the diagnostics you care about for your team's web and mobile apps. When there's an issue, it shows you exactly what's going on, who's being impacted, and how to fix the root cause, down to the specific line of code. See how your users are experiencing your website or app in real time and ship better code faster with confidence, knowing that Raygun will alert you to any new issues or regressions. Start a free 14-day trial of Raygun today and try it for yourself. It only takes a few lines of code, and their simple usage-based plans start at $4 a month, a small price to pay to get your team and users to love you. Visit raygun.com. Try it out. Thank me later. Hi, I'm Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Arpit Mohan. He's the co-founder and CTO at Appsmith. How are you, sir?
I'm doing really well today. How's your day going?
It's going to be a busy day of chatting with wonderful folks on the Hansel Minutes podcast and also parent-teacher conferences. So a bit of a context switch there.
Nice.
So I'm looking at appsmith.com. This is an open source framework to build internal tools, and it's a commercial open source venture of which you are the CTO. And when I look at sites like this, I kind of imagine how it got conceived of, and I assume that there was probably some lone hacker, maybe you or one of your coworkers, who had the idea on an airplane and then coded the whole thing before the airplane landed. Is that how Appsmith got started?
Actually, no. So the way we kind of came about to Appsmith was, so I've been working in and around startups for about a decade now. And through this journey of seeing some, products grow, seeing teams grow, we invariably have to build a lot of admin panels, a lot of dashboards, a lot of internal tools just to keep, the product running. In my previous startup, we were a mobile game, and through a stroke of absolute luck, I think, we went viral. And so we had 1 million downloads on the Play Store within a span of 3 months, 3 or 4 months. We had 100,000 people playing the game at any given point of time during the day. And we just had to, it was just an absolute scramble to keep the lights on at any given point of time. And parallelly, we were getting flooded by about 3,000 odd support emails per day from users. So while it's about just 2% or 3% of our user base, 3,000 support emails per day just to handle that was a big problem. So the support team, they came in and they said, hey, we need an admin panel to be able to filter through all these support emails. We need to tag them. We need to be able to respond to that. And the entire engineering team consisted of 4 people. There were 2 backend engineers, server-side engineers, 2 mobile engineers, and that's it. And we had to then divert our engineering bandwidth from building the product to actually building a lot of these support tools and admin panels for the support team. And this was 2017, 2018. And that's when, the idea sort of came about, where I was like, hey, there has to be a better way. Every team out there requires a customer support dashboard, a marketing dashboard, an offer management system, so on and so forth. Why are we building this from scratch? Why are we, using Bootstrap is fantastic, but why do I have to go down right up to Bootstrap or React Admin? Why can't I just pull a template the way I make my blog or make my website? Why can't we just, speed this along? And that was actually the germination of Appsmith. It took me and my co-founder Abhishek. It took me a long time to convince my co-founder that this is a valuable enough enterprise to kind of focus our energies on. And 6 months later, we shut down that mobile game and we pivoted to working on Appsmith full time. So it's not a lone hacker. In fact, one of my personal philosophies is that the history of software is the history of teams, and no great software is ever built by a lone hacker anymore. It used to be the case back in the early 90s where you had this lone hacker in the basement. And that's what all the movies also, you look at all these hacker movies, quote unquote hacker movies. You see people, typing furiously on their keyboard, and they're able to get into, FBI systems or whatever, some secure networks. That just does not happen anymore. Now you need an entire engineering team, and you need processes to kind of build anything that is worthwhile and valuable.
And it really is the processes, like the that myth, that lone hacker myth, as I was one many years ago, working on a Palm Pilot application. I had no build system. I had no source control. I had, Tuesdaybuild.zip, and it was really not a process. That process comes up a lot, that idea that you need a focused process. Now, when I look at Appsmith, though, I can think about ways I could use it to automate processes that I do even for like this podcast. Like every single week, I log into Azure Storage and I manually edit a JSON file and I do a manual in my mind lookup that should be a drop down list. Those are the kinds of like updating text files, uploading JPEGs, changing databases. Those are the kind of processes that Appsmith could solve. But I'm curious, there's a lot of talk in the computing space right now around low code and no code solutions. Is this something different? This seems like a different philosophy because you're focused on internal tools. Or is this a compete for something like a Power Apps?
In some senses, we do compete with Power Apps. So we are a low-code application, platform. So the difference between something like Power Apps or some of the other existing low-code software is that Appsmith allows you to connect to not just a Microsoft or SQL database. It allows you to connect to any database, any API that you might be running, and build an entire dashboard or admin panel on top of it. So it's more like a front end as a service. So it does not take an opinionated view of what your backend system is, what your data storage layer is. And we say that, business logic is very unique to every single individual. So like in your case, you are a podcaster. There are, 100 other podcasters, but each of them have a unique workflow to get each episode out. No two workflows are exactly the same. So we leave the business logic to the individual or the team itself, and we operate at the front end layer and say that can we make this simpler to use? Can we give a web UI to people to conduct their workflows or go through their workflows? Um, so in that sense, we are slightly different from Power Apps. So where Power Apps is fantastic if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem. If you have like a more disparate system where I want to pull my tickets from Zendesk, I want to insert into MongoDB and then upload to Azure blob storage. So you have a more heterogeneous system. That's where AppSmith starts to really shine.
Yeah, that's a really great point. When I was trying out Appsmith, I was trying to figure out how to get my JSON file from Azure Storage, and then there's literally a choice for curl import. So you have sophisticated choices like Postgres SQL or S3 and things like that. And then I was like, no, just paste in what you would use at the command line, and that will be a curl import. And that was a really interesting philosophical decision to have both the high level and the low level backends available. I was impressed by that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this decision comes from the fact that AppSmith is built for developers. So we don't target business analysts or a pure product managers or the business product managers. We target developers, and we expect folks to have some basic idea of what JavaScript is or some basic way to manipulate their data. They should have some understanding of what HTTP APIs or curl sort of looks like. So we kind of gear the entire product towards developers, and that's where a lot of this philosophy comes from.
Yeah, that philosophy definitely shows. I thought when I was working with it originally that it might be kind of like Airtable, which I think of as being, an Excel or a Google Sheets on steroids. But that's just, when you think about a table of stuff, this could make like complete applications with text boxes over data very quickly. The other thing I was impressed about philosophically was the idea of self-hosting. I thought this was a cloud thing, and I'm thinking, I don't want another cloud service in my life, but there's a choice, isn't there?
Yes. So the reason that in fact, we are a self-hosted first platform. This is something that we actually recommend as our preferred way of using AppSmith, primarily because we build or we help teams build internal tools, and internal tools typically touch sensitive data. This could be your credit card information, your user information, etc. This information is stored in some secure vault. It's in some database behind a firewall, which teams are very reluctant to expose to the public internet. That's why Appsmith is geared as literally a single Docker image. You just pull that image, run it on your EC2 instance or Azure instance inside your firewall behind, and just connect it to your database as you would any other microservice that you would be running. And then you don't have to worry too much about plugging punching holes into your firewall and then exposing whitelisting some IPs, or doing a hop server, or basically jumping through hoops. So you don't have to do all of that. And it's geared for data security and being deployed in more secure environments.
So I'm hearing philosophies that are kind of the opposite of what everyone's philosophy is right now. People are like cloud first, and you're like, no, self-hosted first. You've had some opinions around distributed computing. A lot of people are going, Kubernetes first. Like, I'm going to start a blog. I'll host it on Kubernetes. But even though you're a distributed systems engineer, you're not necessarily a Kubernetes first person, are you?
No. We support Kubernetes as a platform because, like most of a lot of users ask for it. But personally, no. Because while Kubernetes is, a fantastic piece of software, it's probably the most successful open source project in our current times. And Appsmith has a lot, like we have a lot to learn from them as a project and as, a code base. Managing and running Kubernetes, it's not easy. Okay, so you require some skill sets, you require a lot of technical know-how. And if you are running just a blog, or you're a 5-member startup who's looking for a product market fit, or you're in the very early stages, it doesn't make sense to focus your energies on looking at how do I run Kubernetes, how do I manage this cluster. And it's expensive because it's a cluster management system. You need a minimum of 3 nodes. Yes, it can scale. So at the outset, it is slightly more expensive. So while it works for companies like Google, for Netflix, it behooves them to use Kubernetes. But for a very large swath of people who are not Google or Netflix, I would say, think about what's the easiest way to do this, what's the simplest solution that you have, and don't go for the technology the jour, where it's everybody is doing Kubernetes, so I'll do Kubernetes. That does not make sense to me.
At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit the success of your company, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Go to mparticle.com. That's mparticle.com. It seems like the decisions that you make architecturally are very intentional and very deliberate. And you're thinking about, is this needed? Why is this needed? And if it's not needed, then let's just not do it.
Yeah, I think that comes a little bit with experience. Like when you burn your fingers multiple times, and you burn them enough number of times, then you realize, maybe I should just stop putting my hand in the fire. And being a distributed systems engineer, I've led teams that did 30 million transactions a day. We've designed systems that did 100,000 concurrent requests at an SLA of 50 to 100 milliseconds. So I have designed those systems, and I understand the pain points that exist when just running and deploying an entire cluster or a distributed system involves. When you have 100 microservices, just getting them all to dance together to one beat is really, really hard. So which is why, again, if you are not Google, not Netflix, if you're an early stage company, early stage startup, consider not having microservices, consider not using a distributed system. Just put a jar file out there, put a binary out there, just host it on one instance. If you start to get traction, you probably will get some funding. Once you have funding, then worry about these problems. At that point, you can pay some SRE engineers or DevOps engineers to come in and revamp the system for you. But don't worry about it on day one.
Okay, so then let's apply that to something real. I'm in Appsmith right now. I've made a movies database. I'm updating things. I can share it, and I can get a shareable link and someone can go and see it online. But how do I deploy this locally? How do I deploy this internally? And what am I looking at? Is it a jar file? Is it a Docker container?
So the deployment in Appsmith is literally so the entire application is basically one large JSON file with some metadata on it. So the moment you hit deploy or you click the shareable link, that is literally your app that is deployed. So there is no source code that is generated behind the scenes. It is all sort of abstracted away. It is equivalent to you deploying something on, say, Wix or Webflow, where when you click deploy, you don't actually get the HTML, CSS source code, which you then have to host separately. Your AppSmith instance is your deployed instance, and you can have multiple applications running on different URLs or different subdomains, and you can just have shareable links and then share it with specific people the way you would do with, say, a Google Drive link. You just create a Google Doc, click the shareable link, just invite somebody, and they have access to either edit the application or view the application.
Interesting. Okay, so it's an application. There's an application runner. There's an engine,
Yeah,
and then there's the data that represents my application, and then it runs
exactly.
within the AppSmith engine.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Okay, so I have that at app.appsmith.com. If I was going to do self-hosting, how would I then get away from the AppSmith domain and be internal somewhere?
Right. So you can just spin up. So we have multiple installation targets that we support. All of them are Docker based. So you can run one Docker image. So we have a Docker image that is publicly available. You can just run that. You can just do Docker up with the image on your instance, and you'll have AppSmith running on port 80 and 443, and you can just access it via IP. And if you then map your custom DNS, you'll have a custom domain also set up. So we have a lot of documentation around how to set that up. It's actually quite simple, and along with free provisioning of SSL, because security first. And if you want to migrate from app.appsmith, so you were playing around on app.appsmith on our cloud system, and you now want to migrate to your own instance, you can export your application, which again basically exports the entire JSON file, or you can just commit to Git. So you can version control your application and commit to Git. And on your self-hosted instance, you can just do Git import. So you can just point to that Git repo and say, hey, I'm trying to create a new app, but the app sits in this Git repo. So just pull from there. And so you can move between different instances, either through a manual file export import, or by just connecting to Git and connecting to your Git repo on different other instances.
I see. Interesting. So even though I'm not kind of technically making source code, the data that is being fed into the engine can be plugged into Git sync. So I can have DevOps features where I'm versioning and moving forward. So I have an inner loop. I commit my AppSmith JSON to Git. It then gets deployed, picked up by the Docker file, and I assume that the Docker file then is versioned itself because you're pulling from either a Docker repository or your own repository. So that's where the versioning happens if I was going to update the engine?
Yes. The Docker file is available on our GitHub repo. So that's the one that actually builds the images. And yes, so we have versions that are released every week or every 2 weeks. So the Docker image itself is versioned. And AppSmith also ships with auto updates. So when you are running on your instance, you can actually run it as a SaaS service essentially that is self-hosted. So you never have to worry about upgrading to a new version, because when we release a new upgrade, your instance will automatically upgrade, and you can also set up maintenance windows if you are so inclined. So you can treat it as a SaaS service essentially, just that it's now running on your instance and not on a third party instance.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I thought that the versioning would happen at the from line of the Docker file, and I would have to go and update it and then rebuild an image and pull from a new.
No, nothing of that nature. Absolutely not. You just do So as a user of AppSmith, all you need to do is just Docker run, and that's it. And then just forget about it. Never again SSH into that server again. That's what we expect, and that's what we are aiming towards.
Right. Yeah. I've actually talked about this just recently on the show, the idea of the principle of least surprise.
Yeah.
I was in my mind expecting surprises. And I was like, oh, they're going to make me edit this Docker file, and I'm going to have to go and have a whole build process. And you just made it not surprising at all.
Yeah. In fact, this is something that I kind of talked to recently. In fact, I was talking to the team as well, where I was talking to them about the fact that, you know, if you're looking for excitement or challenges or, etc. in life, don't look for it in work. Find a hobby and get excited there. Just do the boring stuff that just works without surprises, and let this be. So over here, again, we come from that mindset that developers have 20 other things that they are kind of juggling in the air at any given point of time. You have some issues to fix, and people to answer to, and so on and so forth. This should not be at the top of your mind. As long as we at Appsmith can fade away into the background and just let you, the user, the developer, accomplish what they need to do, then we are successful.
If you go looking for drama, you'll probably find it.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm very anti-drama, whether it's in deployments or whether it's in work, or I just don't like it.
Yeah, that's really cool. That is an interesting philosophy. It seems like, have you tried to infuse that kind of like deliberate, no drama focus through all of your startups?
No, this is something that I've learned over the years. In fact, our first startup a decade ago had quite a lot of stuff going on. And, we were young, we were like 20, 22-year olds. We just didn't know any better. But I think a little bit with age, it's come to a point where you're like, hey, let's just have fun with our families, with our friends, with colleagues as well. But let's not bring drama into the code, into our deployments, into the stuff that we do. Let's just do the boring thing that works and just let it be.
That is the way to do it. That is the way to do it. Okay, so there's no you're less interested in distributed computing. You're less interested in drama. You don't believe in the myth of the lone hacker, but you still are doing an open source project. Why is this open source with an open source commercial plan, as opposed to hiding all of your source and keeping it to yourselves and doing it in that more traditional way?
Right. That's actually a very good question. And this is something that we sort of went through the motions of evaluating whether we should open source Appsmith or not. And the reason we ended up actually going the open source route was because A, we realized that we are building for developers, and the first thing that developers love is open source. Like all things being equal, given an option between an open source project and a closed source alternative, developers would choose open source. Again, all things being equal, assuming that both products do the same thing. So developers, because we are built for developers, we wanted people to be able to go into the code base and edit it if they don't like it. Because we are a builder platform, we want developers to be able to edit the Appsmith code base and add features that they think are missing today, or they think they cannot get by without. And it also reduces the friction, where there's always a thought around vendor lock-in. Like, I'm going to use Appsmith today, but I'm not going to get locked in because tomorrow I will have this X requirement that Appsmith does not suffice, and then I'll have to migrate 50 apps to a new platform, etc. In this way, people can fork Appsmith, change or improve the code base as it is, and they are able to make edits without getting locked in. So you can run a fork of Appsmith if you so wish to, and add the feature. In fact, some of our, some really good, like our charting feature, for example, was contributed by a PhD student who wanted to actually use Appsmith for his PhD dissertation, but he's like, I don't see these 5 chart types that I want to use to visualize my data. And he contributed upstream, and now everybody benefits from it. So the community overall for a builder platform like Appsmith, I think, is integral to its success. And this
Hmm.
is true of any programming language also that you see. So I view Appsmith very, in some senses, very similar to programming languages like Go or .NET or Java, where, because again, they are builder platforms. They are not products or SaaS products, quote unquote. They are actually builder platforms, and they are all built in the open because it just increases that feedback loop and helps improve everybody's lives.
Yeah. When people who are like decision makers, other CTOs at big companies, they look at a product like Appsmith and they say, "Oh, I've not heard of that before. That looks really cool." And then they think, "Do I bet my important internal tool on this, this smallish up and coming company?"
Mhm.
They worry, "Oh, maybe the company will go away. Maybe I'll have vendor lock in. Maybe both things will happen." But then if they go to like a Microsoft or an Amazon or somebody big, then they go, "Well, maybe this will go away. Maybe I'll get vendor lock in." They think the same thing, but it seems like sometimes they want to pick the big company for no other reason than it's big. I know you've probably heard the phrase, "No one ever got fired for choosing IBM,"
Right.
right? Because it's the easy thing to do. Do you think that being an open source first and then commercial open source company is a superpower that's going to allow you to compete with the big guys?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. While the big guns like Salesforce, Lightning Platform, Microsoft Power Apps, I think AWS also has an equivalent low code. I think it's called Honey Code. So while there are a lot of these other products, just being out there in the open allows us to build a community of developers and users, and allows the entire community to build on top of Appsmith and improve Appsmith a lot more. In fact, it kind of helps us as from the internal team to hear ideas from the community and see how Appsmith is being used. Because the thing that surprises me each day with a platform like Appsmith is that I could have never imagined Appsmith ever being used in this particular area in this particular way. But people end up doing that. And as a creator platform, the feedback that we get from the community and from users is absolutely mind-bogglingly good. So that helps us improve the product, the project itself, the product itself, and it also drives more and more people towards the product because it's open source and there is there's a very vibrant community on Discord and on Discourse as well. So the more we start to get used, being open source drives is that added benefit for developer users.
Yeah, and it's interesting also that you've picked the developer as your focus because we hear about citizen coders, we hear about business coders. I started out in the early '90s in like Access 2 and Access 95, which were taking business people, taking front end office people, and turning them into coders. But I think that users are a little more sophisticated now. They know about REST APIs and they know about JSON files. So you're kind of blurring the lines a little bit. A sophisticated Office user or a developer could sit down in Appsmith and get something done very, very quickly. After the tutorial, it doesn't hold your hand. It just gives you a million widgets and a million options, and it really enables you to do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So while the citizen coder has, as a term has been thrown around quite a bit, I very strongly believe that in order to build anything that is moderately complicated, like any admin panel, dashboard, any piece of software that is even moderately complicated, means that you need to know how your data is laid out. You need to be able to have some coding knowledge. Today, it's JavaScript. Back in the day, as you said, in the 90s, that was Microsoft Access, or I've coded in Fox Pro as well. So you needed to know a little bit of that as a business user as well. So as long as you have some knowledge around software development and how your data is laid out in your Excel sheets or your databases, it's sufficient. And today, a large part of that information resides with developers or technical product managers or technical folks. So, yeah, so I would say that citizen coder is a myth. You don't expect your sales head or your VP sales to be going and mucking around by building an application. They care
Mm,
about just getting that $1 million deal in. That's
yeah.
that's their OKRs are aligned with that $1 million deal. They don't care about how they get that done.
But at the same time, I'll push back gently on that. Like I have family members. My sister-in-law is a front desk admin, and she is often asked to do tasks that I feel, a good for loop could solve. And it's where, either you apply muscle or you apply, some scripting. But I don't think that I want to sit down and teach my relative PowerShell or something. And it makes me wish that an application like a Visual Basic 6 existed. And I felt like that when I opened Appsmith for the first time. It was really surprising, actually, how quickly I got into the designer. I went to appsmith.com, I hit try, and then suddenly I was like in a designer. I was like, wow, they didn't like, I expected videos and tutorials. I expected a lot of like ceremony, but
Right.
you got me into an app really quickly. So the question then is, how sophisticated does my front end family member need to be? Like, how much web stuff do they need to know to do something like this?
Over here, I absolutely agree with you. By the way, so I have my cousin sister. She works in public policy, so she deals with a bunch of data, and I've been trying to get her to learn Python because I'm like, you're dealing with data. Just learn a little bit of Python and just be able to manipulate this instead of doing that muscle work that you're doing today. Having said that, I think the bar is not very high. So, like I said, you need to know a little amount of JavaScript to be able to manipulate data on the front end and you need to be able to query data. Now, the querying the data can come from Google Sheets, Airtable, or it can come from a REST API or Postgres. So, in your case, let's say in your example for your sister, I'm assuming like her data will reside somewhere in Excel sheets or an Airtable. So as long as she can bring that data to Appsmith and she has a little amount of JavaScript, basic JavaScript knowledge, maybe I think 1 week on free code camp is all that you really need, that amount of knowledge to manipulate that information on the UI and how you want it to be displayed. That's all that you really need. You really don't need to know any HTML, CSS, etc., because it's built by people like me. I'm CSS challenged. I really don't get CSS, and that's why we built Appsmith. So she doesn't need to know any HTML, any CSS. She just needs to know basic JavaScript and the ability to connect to Google Sheets or wherever the data lies.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Arpit Mohan, for chatting with me today.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Scott. Thank you so much for having me.
You can check out Appsmith at appsmith.com. It's really easy to sign up. Check it out. It's also open source and can be self-hosted. Super cool stuff from Arpit and the friends at Appsmith. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.